America, we love you, no matter the cost. The red, white, and blue sails under God. Seeds of wisdom must be sown. One nation, indivisible, proud.
Former governor of Pennsylvania, Samuel Pennypacker, was a descendant, and he was also a very good historian. Kept amazing documentation and even some artifacts in the house from the Andersons. So I have a brief little thing I'd like to read because I feel like this is my first time doing it. And we'll see how I do and we'll go from there. But it'll give you a little bit of a background of the house and the people that lived here. The Anderson family were Schuylkill Township's earliest European settlers. James Anderson, a Scotsman who arrived as an indentured servant in 1710, bought 340 acres in 1713 along the Pickering Creek, which is down there, when the Pickering Creek was sold off in pieces. And he worked off his 5 years indenture at the Quaker-owned Great Valley Mill, which stands on North Valley Road in Tredyffrin. And what happened is he eloped with the miller's daughter, and they came over Valley Forge Mountain and lived in a cave here. And they were the first settlers, or white European settlers, to come to this area. And they had a good relationship with the Indians here. When they had their first baby, all the Indians came to watch because they never saw a white person. and when the mother had to go about her business, and this is all through Governor Pennypacker. There's some more. Hello.
Hello, better late than ever.
Sure. You didn't miss much.
Okay, well they'll just
Okay.
all in.
So the Indians would breastfeed the baby, who was Patrick Anderson. Now, an interesting reason why I'm bringing this up now is if you all want to walk around to the front of this at the time, you'll see a bowl in the wall. It's worth walking around to see, and what I was told was that bowl was given to the Andersons by the Indians to grind their corn. So if you look right down here, to look at is if you look at the township, Schuylkill Township, there are requirements for a property like this with this kind of history to it. And there's different grades of property, or levels. And the level of this property is anything done to the outside of the building has to be approved. So they made a map of this property back in the 1920s. So, no, but it's back to the
What are you doing next? You guys taking pictures?
During the Revolutionary War, and I'll come back to this in a little while, they destroyed the whole property, the British did. They sacked the house. And so it was rebuilt after 1804. That was built in 1840. So why? Because it's probably what they had available at the time. So, but this was 1804, 1840. Benjamin Franklin describing about deserters and what they were going to do about it, since he was the captain of that time. By September 1777, Patrick, now a major, was with Wayne at the Paoli Massacre, as the Continentals and British jockeyed for position in the Charleston area between the battles at Brandywine and Germantown. Back at that time, people that had some money owned the house, and they might have done those kind of things. Yeah. So everybody feel free to step inside. So maybe obviously the jump into another.
Inside hiding. No. Sorry. Onward and upward. Now we gotta go back.
Fireplace. So then they just kept that alive and just put the stove there.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah. Great. So you had the cranes in there and all that.
Yeah. You'll see in the washroom. That is so cool. They turned it into something very clever. So this is the 2010.
If he so.
It's nice to have a full kitchen out here. How'd you get the fireplace in there too?
Thank you so much.
Oh, yeah, if you want to.
Have a pretzel and some water?
And he collected antiques, especially things from family members. History was a big part of his life. His father, his name is Isaac Anderson Pennypacker, named for his grandfather.
Congratulations, you remember. Let's sign this and send in your check. So, what if you do that? So they send theirs in.
Okay, I'm good.
I know we went up there to two places you could.
New members can add in the roster.
Thank you. I'm Mary Ann. Nice to meet you. Hi there.
Michael, the historian.
Hi.
Nice.
And Max Marlowe. Nice to meet you. And Chaz is our friend over there.
Hi, Jazz.
Okay.
So this is the three M's, Mary Ann, Michael, and Max.
Exactly. You got it. Thank you.
Well, thank you for coming. Really, it's a pleasure to have you here. I think I'd like to just start with, General Wayne is buried here. You've probably seen his grave in the back of the church there. Well, I'd like to start with showing you the grave of his grandfather, the first Wayne to come to America in 1722. They left from Ireland. His name was Captain Anthony Wayne, and this is his grave. He came with his three sons, and his one son is buried here. He was only 18 when he died. He's buried with him here. His other son Isaac is buried here. This is General Anthony Wayne's father, Isaac Wayne, who was in the French and Indian War, veteran of the French and Indian War, on the St. David's Vestry, prominent in the area. This is a wonderful, wonderful character. He's buried with his daughter Anne, General Wayne's sister Anne, and this is General Wayne's brother-in-law, Anne's husband, Captain William Hayman, who was a Navy captain during the Revolution. You can see with the Revolutionary War markers on all of our veterans. We have quite a few veterans of the Revolution here. Not many. We have one soldier who was actually the pastor William Perry's son, Richard, who died in 1776 while he was in the service. He was actually sent home, but I technically think of him as a veteran who died in the service. He was ill and was sent home in 76, and he's buried at the chancel window with Reverend Curry and his wives as well. So, but I just wanted to show you some background. And in the old colonial graveyards, as you can see, most of the stones are lined up east to west, and there's a reason for that from the scripture when the last day when Christ comes from the east, everybody's to rise up and meet the Lord, and we all go home and live happily ever after. Hopefully. So I should just say, Captain Anthony Wayne, he was a veteran of the Battle of the Boyne, the famous battle in Ireland. He was distinguished himself. Which side? He was on the side of King William of Orange, and some against James II, who was the legal Catholic king, Charles II's brother. When Charles II died, it went to James II, but the only problem was he was quite Catholic, and the English people would have nothing to do with the Catholic king, so they sent to Holland to Prince William of Orange, became King William III. Now there's a story that Captain Anthony Wayne actually knew King William of Orange. There were some things that happened during the battle that could have brought the two closely together. Captain Wayne was the captain of dragoons, who were sort of a light cavalry. They were cavalry troops who were able to dismount and fight, behind hedges or walls or whatever. They weren't strictly confined to horse cavalry fighting. There's a story that Captain Wayne was given some land in the south of Ireland for his distinguished service at the Battle of the Boyne. There was a problem at the Boyne with William's army trying to cross the river to get to James's army. And I'm not really sure, but I think that Captain Wayne had something to do with finding the crossing fords to get over to James II's army. By the way, William technically won the battle. James turned around and fled, and sort of left his French troops and Irish troops to do their own bidding, and he went back to France. King William was pretty nice about the whole thing. There were other battles after the Battle of the Boyne that really determined the Williamite wars in Ireland. He was pretty fair. He let a lot of the French soldiers who were fighting for James go back to France, along with some of the Irish troops as well. So that's how that turned out. But he was given land in Ireland. They stayed there for about 20 years. And he got the notion to come to America. So in 1722, they sold the place in Ireland and boarded the ship and came across. So he also came with his very good friend, John Hunter, who's buried there, I believe. They were friends at the Battle of the Boyne. They were side-by-side cavalrymen. They were friends from even before that, from England. And John Hunter's relative, one of his relatives, I think it was his daughter, was a settler here and gave him the notion to come to America. So that gave the Waynes the idea that they should come here, and they came and bought the land at Waynesboro and built Waynesboro, the Wayne Mansion, not too far from here. So yeah, just wanted to give you a little background on the Wayne family there.
Thank you.
As we go, you probably can notice the markers of all the Revolutionary War vets. Chaz, you were doing a report on the Revolutionary vets. Do we have about 13 or 14?
Yeah, about 13 or 14, and we've uncovered a couple other ones that we're investigating as well. Yeah, and some of them died during battles, some of them died like Curry's son did.
Yes.
And then some of them lasted through the war and even went into the 1800s and didn't die until sometime in the 1800s.
In the 1800s,
yeah.
So on the way in, I saw the grave of Dr. Henry Carter with a British flag, London born. What's his story?
Well, he has an interesting story, and I'd like to make sure the British flag isn't where General Wayne can see it. So someone plants a British flag there every year. It's sort of a mystery. We don't know who does it. It just appears there. Dr. Henry Carter, believe it or not, was the second surgeon on Lord Nelson's flagship, the HMS Victory.
Wow.
Yes. There were a few surgeons or doctors And he was at the Battle of Trafalgar, where Lord Nelson was mortally wounded and most likely helped tend to his wounds. Came here in midlife and raised his family here and a member of St. David's. But he has an interesting story. He's usually not credited. Usually a surgeon named Beatty was the main surgeon.
He wrote the book on Nelson's death.
Okay, yeah, he was the main guy, but certainly Henry Carter was in there as well, because it was a big thing that the admiral of the fleet in the fleet's flagship died in battle. And then there's a story that to get him back to England, they put him in a barrel of rum to keep him in good shape. And
Two expressions come from that. One is tapping the admiral because they drew the sailors some of the brandy, and the other is the British grog ration is still known as Nelson's Spot because the sailors would take the brandy and they would sip it.
Oh my goodness.
yeah, right, sure. Wow, that's great. Thank you, Pastor.
Cool.
But that's who Henry Carter is. So yeah, another interesting character. Keep looking out for the flag placer as I go. But I haven't caught him yet. It's been over 20 years that that's been happening.
Really?
Yeah.
It's his ghost.
Yeah. If you want to progress a little bit,
Yeah, point out the stake that we have over there.
let me just show you.
Just put the stake there.
Oh, sure. Yeah, thanks, Chaz. This is we just found the first grave, the first burial of St. David's.
How am I doing?
Great.
Okay, right there.
Yeah, his name is Edward Hughes. Thank you, Chaz. It took a little bit of digging. The records from that far back are a little sketchy, but we found the place, and we're in the process of making a new monument.
The interesting thing about this is that we have a rubbing, the Historical Society of Pennsylvania has a rubbing of a number of the gravestones here, but in particular that one.
Oh.
And Michael pointed out that not only do we know exactly what it said, but we know the dimensions of the gravestone. And my understanding is that the gravestone was purchased in London and came over here as ballast in the ship, and was there long enough to, about 100 years ago, have had a rubbing done of it.
Wow.
Now it's gone. And we have no idea. I told my grandson it was stolen. We don't know, but it's not there.
Yeah, it might be a coffee table.
So anyway, we've just had a bronze plaque made that's going to go on a stone to go there.
It's
What's happening now?
as you see, the type of stone that the church is built from, it's local field stone. So we got a nice boulder. The property manager found a really nice field stone boulder. Polly is her name. This is her grave here. And she was from the Penrose family, famous Philadelphia family. Penrose were shipbuilders. One was a mayor at one time, but very prominent Philadelphia family. They were married at Christ Church. General Wayne is listed on her grave as well, which when I get to his story, it's very likely that General Wayne was buried in not two places, but actually three, because at the funeral, you could just sort of imagine his children bringing some bones over to put in Polly's wing. So that's only my take, but he's definitely buried in two places, but I think he's buried in three. And this is Polly Wayne's sister, Margaret Penrose, buried right next to her. In 1797, General Wayne was on an inspection tour of what was then the frontier. Washington made him general of the army at that time, so he was responsible for inspecting all frontier forts and garrisons and any kind of military installation. And he was on one of these tours when he was rounding Lake Erie, the shores of Lake Erie, and he fell ill. There was a blockhouse up there, Fort Presque Isle it was called. A restoration of the blockhouse, probably a recreation is more like it, is standing there now. It's Fort Presque Isle State Park. he fell ill at the blockhouse. There was a doctor at the fort. They put him to bed. From what I read, he was, still General Wayne, still pretty ornery. Didn't want to, lay down or anything. So he passed away there after a few days of being sick. He had all kinds of medical problems at the time. He had been wounded a few times in battle, as you know. And I think things were just catching up with him. And he passed away at the blockhouse. His request was to be buried at the flagpole there, so they buried him there, thinking all was well. Well, 13 years later, his family at St. David's, his son Isaac, who's right here, one of these, yes. And the rest of the family said, we have to bring his remains back to St. David's. This was his parish. This is where he was raised. So they had the plan to go up to Lake Erie, outside of Erie, and bring his bones back and reinter him here. Well, when they got up there, well, Isaac went, but now we're learning that there may have been another person with him. But we don't know that for sure. When he got there, they disinterred him. They opened the casket, and they found that the general was in really fine condition, that he would never, they couldn't take the body back down to St. David's in that state, so they ended up boiling his body in a big kettle up there and boiled him down to his bones, and Isaac then drove the bones down here from Erie, which must have taken weeks in those times, in order to bury them here. And Isaac, no one had any idea that this was going to be the case, so Isaac said that if he had known what they were in for, he would never have undertaken the trip. But they were happy to get the bones down here and get them buried. There's an old legend that has come up from the early times, a local legend that at some point in the trip, some of the general's bones bounced out of the cart. And on New Year's Eve, he rides through here between Waynesboro and St. David's looking for the bones that bounced out. I've never seen him, but my father told me this when I was a small tyke, and it was well known around Wayne, around the area, this legend. And I was here on New Year's Eve a few times. Never saw the horse, but I probably gave up too soon, really. But that's an old legend that still exists about General Wayne and his bones. Anyway, he was buried here with a lot of pageantry. Some of the old soldiers, his veterans, were here. His old chaplain gave a speech. David Jones gave a speech. First City Troop was here to escort the bones from Waynesboro to St. David's, and it was a big, affair. It really was. The monument was designed by a famous Philadelphia architect, William Strickland. He also did the monument at the Paoli battlefield. He also did the tower at St. Peter's Church at 4th and Pine in Philadelphia, and was responsible for a lot of other projects in early Philadelphia. There's also a Revolutionary Soldiers graveyard out on Route 23 in East Vincent Township, and it has a monument from 1830 that's almost identical to the Wayne monument here. You can see that the stone was dedicated by the State Society of the Cincinnati at that time, at the time of the burial. They were here as well, and that was a group of an organization of high-ranking United States soldiers and officers at the time. They're still continued to this day being a group. So here as well, but that's General Wayne's grave. His son is here, his son's wife, more in those the table tomb styles.
Can we get in the church?
Let's see, we can see, yeah.
I have to ask, what did they do with the boiled parts?
They reburied, I forgot, I'm sorry, they reburied the flesh at the flagpole.
Okay.
And bones came down here.
I'm hoping they put them back.
Yeah. They supposedly buried everything, all the tools, everything thrown in.
And whose idea was, let's boil the body?
Well, it was the surgeon at the blockhouse, because it would never have lasted coming down without any embalming or anything. It would have been a pretty bad trip. So if they had to be buried together, go side by side or stack them. But this seems to be, this is called the footstone. I'm sorry I didn't explain this before. Colonial graves had a headstone and a footstone, like a bed. The initials were usually on the footstone, and the full name and epitaph on the headstone. So it was like being in a bed. But this states that they are both buried in one grave, and it seems like they're buried sort of like this way. Double depth burial, so it went down pretty far. When I saw the edge of the grave was a gigantic, maybe 3-foot vein of, we used to call it Indian clay. When I was a kid, it would be in the creeks. It was a gray clay that we would make pots with and stuff. So there's a whole vein of very thick clay, and to try to dig through that as the sexton of old, and who dug the graves, was very tough. So they dug one section and just put them this way. So he actually died in 1783, and I was always wondering, many of the pro-British loyalists, their lands were taken or they were sent to Canada or different things. And Max actually just found out this morning that the Treaty of Versailles stated that lands taken should be returned back to their owners. So in '83, that's great, Max. I appreciate you telling me that. I had no idea. Maybe a reason why Judge Moore was allowed to retain his lands over there. But anyway, he was an interesting character. His house was used by the British and by the American Army at different times during the Revolution. At one time, when the Americans decided to use it, the usual thing is for the family to move to the second floor, and the Army would use the first floor. In Judge Moore's case, he complained the whole time. He went to the American officer with his sword. He had been head of the Chester County Militia for many years. He was a colonel. He presented the sword to the Americans as if he were surrendering the house, and the Americans just said, no way, keep your sword, we don't need it. Just sort of trying to calm him down a little bit. But then he died right at the end of the war. So that's Judge Moore. A legend came up that always was around St. David's, that when I had people come on Saturdays wanting to see the grave of the British guy who the Patriots would step on his grave, this kind of thing. So anyway, I looked into it and I found some records in St. Peter's Great Valley Church archives where two people from St. Peter's were talking about the death of Judge Moore and where he chose to be buried. He actually wanted to be buried inside the church, but St. David stopped these in-church burials in the 1720s. There were only a few burials within the church under the pews here. So they said, we can't get you in the church, but we'll get you as close as we can to the front door if you want. So it was actually a place of honor and a very high honor for Judge Moore to be buried there, but because it was pro-British, this legend erupted over the years. And the two guys at St. Peter's said, good, I'm glad he's buried there. Now we can step on his nose, the quote was saying. So that evolved into this legend that only because he was British he was buried there and they could step on him. But actually, he was very highly respected judge, Chester County judge. Anyway, as far as the church goes, you can see it's very sparse in decoration, very plain, colonial style, Georgian windows. What ornament is here is a Georgian neoclassic, you would say. There's a cross over the front door. I'll tell you the story about that. That's actually the cross of St. David. That's called St. David. It's the patron saint of the country of Wales, where these Welsh settlers came from, who started St. David's, founded it, and named the parish St. David's after St. David of Wales. That's the cross of St. David's.
Don't be bashful, or you dig in whatever you want, okay?
There you go. I saw that. I saw that.
And I usually come down all dressed up. I'm like, can you just put on your outfit? Do I have to put on the whole outfit?
PUS of A quickly expanded, with Pennsylvania leading the way in the number of camps and in membership. Throughout our 175-year history, there have 1,658 different camps at various times and locations just throughout Pennsylvania.
You didn't tell me I had to turn it on too now.
We would like to get a group picture. That's
Yes, that's better.
Donna Marie, come on.
Yeah, get in there.
Come on, Donna Marie. I'm gonna head over. We got a pack and get going.
Okay, safe trip.
Yeah.
Take care.
All right, let me see my log.
Look at that. Sit down, hippie girl.
Everybody say hi.
Yeah, that's a very good right over there.
And explain the proximity of some of the soil to that location. You know.
You're a very good time. You don't know it yet, but you're gonna really enjoy yourselves. We are sitting in the 1940 addition to the house. The actual museum starts with that stone wall. To be invaluable. I think it's a good time for me to mention that I'm very grateful for your ancestors. If it wasn't for them, my ancestors wouldn't have had a place to come to be free. And that's at least much of the lintel is being here.
because in 1940, the man who bought the house and enlarged it, he cut this, took this piece out because he put a door.
I'm like,
No, yeah.
I'm not going to be the guy that breaks his chair.
Originally, it was an access road and PennDOT to fix the overpasses.
Welcome to the Mullen House Woodshop. This probably was not here when Mr. Mullen was here, but at the same time we felt what we wanted to do was to show people some of the tools and some of the techniques that would have been used in carpentry or in woodworking at the time when this was built in the colonial period. I want to point out that one of the things that was always seen was a sign. Because if you've been to Europe, you know that many of the people could not read. And so rather than making a sign that you would have to read, they'd simply show what it is. And so this is our sign of the woodworker. Behind me is our premier woodworker, Paul. But come on, step in, and first of all, we want to see how this is.
Specialized in turning. We would make parts for chairs and stuff. And you might have a joiner that was just specialized in making doors and windows. But there was all these other different trades. You know, you could specialize as being a carver, and that's all you did, or a painter, or this or that. But out here in the country, it was a little more generalized. So if I was a joiner, I would probably do some cabinet making work. I'd probably do some carpentry work.
And you just kind of scrub away.
Okay.
Some questions and a couple of individual.
You built the barn first because your animals were your livelihood, so you built a place for them, and then when they were safe and snug, you built a house. So this is part of a barn. Most of it The big part of it was in that courtyard. It collapsed a long time ago. So this is like the forebay, the porch of a barn. You guys can sit or walk around as much as you want.
Lisa will tell her about it, and she goes, oh, we all want to be able to paint like that. I think she's just as good. Look at this.
Did you see the swimming pool in the back?
Yeah.
The cement pond?
It's being cleaned. Beautiful, like a sprinkler came over. It's a I love this property. Later on, I want a picture of you.
Okay.
If you don't mind.
Which portrait? I have two of them.
Oh, well.
What's your favorite? I like the old one better.
This one down here.
The more abstract one.
Paper hat.
Is that okay? I need such a bath.
Oh, it's getting to get you over there.
I've
just learned how to do. Oh, you're taking pictures. You're taking a few movies
Oh,
as we go.
Can I get you anything to drink, dear? Unsweetened iced tea.
You got it.
I'm gonna go sit over there if you want to join me out.
I don't have sweet, but I can bring up a sugar patty for you. Does that work?
Yes.
Hello.
How are you? She's recording for like I kind of. Yeah, it's a big part, so it's just
I feel like Mr. Rourke.
If you would like to drink, you order from this menu. And all the food is over there. Okay. You can get iced tea, you can get anything.
And where do you all live?
Virginia.
Where in Virginia?
We'll go with Mount Vernon area.
This is I heard of Kentucky. I believe she's here to stay. Because I'm not the young woman I was.
they're trying to break from Virginia, right, on their way.
It would usually be about a week. Travel was So I'm glad you got here safe. And you brought these friends with you. Good evening, and you also from that.
I understand from Tim, you've been coming in here since 2004. My first one was 2006. So I've been hiring her. Because they said to me, what's your succession plan? Let me look around. But thank you for coming. We always look forward to this every year. I understand you're getting a tour of our house tomorrow. Molly will be talking about that in a few minutes. Our soon to become our headquarters in the center of the park, right on the Grand Parade. But in any event, I'm glad that you're all here. I'm glad that we could join you. Thank you for inviting us year after year. We were originally the Friends of Valley Forge, now we're the Valley Forge Park Alliance, because we cast our net a little wider in the park, since all the community around the park bring them into the park. So anyway, I'd like to introduce, by the way, the General is not in the house tonight.
Oh.
But we have someone even better. Lady Washington is with us. Lady Washington.
Would you like me to say a few words?
I would like you to say.
Well, then, if you don't mind, of course, women, we know how to chat, don't we? But I will keep it very brief. But thank you, indeed. And thank you is most certainly what I would like to begin with. I am, as I have said, honored that I've been asked to visit with such wonderful people. Those who are keeping alive the memories of those who served in the valley. And so I thought perhaps you would like me to just tell my own experience. When I first arrived here in the valley, it was in February of 1778. And I must be honest with everyone, I thought this to be the most dreary kind of a place. And if it rains later, you'll all feel the same way. I also discovered it was rather uncomfortably provided for the general. Many officers had arrived before him. Some of perhaps the better homes had already been accommodated. But most fortunately, the Potts home was available.
Could you get that music
here where I met with the general. And an understanding that I myself, never having been here, I learned very quickly that the valley lay between two rivers. And I do wonder, as you so perhaps know, what are the names of those two hills?
Mount Joy.
Mount Misery and Mount Joy. And to my own mind, and I do not know, sir, if this is truly true, but to my own mind, Mount Misery must be the bigger of the two hills.
I think it is.
And he agrees with me. He does indeed. And there was ever so much more misery here in the valley than there ever was joy. My own arrival coincided with a critical lack of provisions for the soldier. Many times nothing more than fire cake, or as the soldiery would call it, lead in the belly. Nothing much more than water and flour. It was a difficult time for provisions of clothing and such. And so therefore the deprivations that were suffered were severe. Illness was rampant, as everyone well knows. But nevertheless, for myself, for my arrival, I considered it as the wife of the Commander-in-Chief that I would be able to provide for the officers and their wives as much civility and society as could be accomplished in these difficult circumstances. And at the same time, it most certainly was not the opportunity for a show of ostentation. A simplicity of dress, most appropriate rather than fine suits when others were so suffering. But I do wish to remind those that I was not the only woman at Valley Forge. There were many other of the officers' wives who came. They were willing to be able to suffer the deprivations, to support their husbands and their brothers and their spouses that were there, and also children. And recognizing it was that support that the ladies who came thought they came for. And there were those such as, well, you all know Katie Green, the wife of Nathaniel Green. She was here. Katie, General Green, he considered Katie to be his little angel. I must admit, it wasn't Middlebrook, which was after the Valley, of course, that Katie, she danced with the General, and that would be my General, General Washington. My dancing days are done, but she danced with the General for 3 hours straight. I always thought Katie might have been in her cups that night. But in the Valley, there was also Lady and Kitty Sterling, and they'd given up the rights of an earldom to be able to support independency. And cannot forget Lucy Knox, General Knox's wife. Lucy and I came quite close together. I always admired the sacrifices that she had made. For her family were loyalists. And of course she was from Boston. And finally her parents, they nearly left and returned to England. And poor Lucy, never to see her parents again. A great sacrifice. But along with the ladies who traveled to comfort their husbands, there were also many, as you are well aware, of those camp followers. Nearly, I believe, 400 of them followed the soldier. And these women suffered just as did the soldier. These women were able to be, let me see your papers. Yes, washer. You can check. That was a necessary job.
Director of Visitor and Community Engagement here at Valley Forge. So all of our public-facing programs and our partner relations and everything, a lot of that goes through me. So,
I keep thinking of Chief of Education.
Yeah. And then that's part of it. There's a bunch of stuff I do. So, yeah, I gotta sneak through. I'm gonna be facing the other direction. Bob Seger back in the 1970s. The opening act was this group out of New York called KISS. Bob Seger, I guess, went out on stage, like, before he even, like, started playing guitar, he's like, how am I supposed to follow that? You know, so.
Work well.
Okay. So, what I'm here to present to you guys on today is actually the history of Valley Forge, not so much as to what your ancestors went through. I think Martha did a absolutely spectacular job of going into what happened during the encampment. What I want to talk about is what happened afterwards, because it went from this encampment in 1778, and then the army left. Did it immediately become a sacred shrine to be forever preserved for eons? The majority of the people that lived here were more than happy to see your family go. Yeah. And then there was the pre-encampment. There really was an iron forge there. This is actually one of the biggest questions we get in the park: is where did the name come from, Valley Forge? And it's like, well, it is a valley, and it was a center of ironworking in southeast Pennsylvania. Most of the industry was owned by the Potts family, which were the providers of the house for the general. And that house was actually built there before it was the encampment. Sometime we have a couple of conflicting records, one saying as early as 1757, another one saying as late as 1773. But that house predates the Revolutionary War. So, and most of the industry in the area was burned by the British in 1777. So a few months before the army arrives, the British come through actually looking for supporters of the patriots of the Continental Army, and they found this huge stock of military supplies in some of the warehouses and everything, and they put the torch to all of the industrial buildings there. So the iron forges, the mills, all of the military, actually I guess you can still find flints in Valley Creek, because I guess some barrels of flints got dumped out.
And the Alliance, I feel like we are that citizen group that started when Washington's headquarters were saved. We are that group now. I'm so proud to be that group. And I'm so proud to have careers like you to have this. Bernie needs to get an escalator. It means a lot for you all across the country to this here. So, and we're really excited. I know you've already heard it, but the future of Valley Forge is this house that we are moving into. It's a very old house, not here when the encampment was here, but moving in. I hope next year we might gather there. I don't know, since our construction hasn't started yet. But I appreciate everything. Very exciting about the Morris Stevens house. Carol, thank you.
The mitigation of the asbestos, we concluded that I want to say the last final
Like the little drink?
Ray Jasmine Bush was sometimes they felt like his teacher said he was going to be a appreciation. It will be one and you will respect.
Yes, I will.
Please then.
It's pretty bad.
We got all things.
Oh, yes. Oh, the pretzel.
That the two most pivotal events in American history were Gettysburg and Valley Forge. And he said, now, I believe that the American people, if they needed to demonstrate the heroism that characterized Gettysburg, without a doubt, I believe the American people would do it. This goes on and on and on. They just have a bad day every day. But they stood firm, so many of them, because of the great ideals of the American cause. Namely, as Washington said, when he said he believed that his officers and soldiers would be of one heart and one mind because of their sacred duty, grounded in their sacred cause, which was for liberty, independence, and peace. And today, we are beneficiaries of their sacrifice. I try to remember that every day. Not to take for granted what it means to live in this great country. And it wouldn't be without Valley Forge. That's what Roosevelt was saying. He saw how pivotal it was because not only did they persevere in the winter, that's something I try to remind tourists when they come here, but this is where those men also became the army that could defeat the British. If it wasn't for what Washington did through von Steuben here, would have probably been a lot of battles just like Germantown, just like Brandywine, just like Hale, and the list goes on. But instead, a new army came out of the ashes here And of course, that became the turning point in the American Revolution. So today, to be able to greet you, who are proud descendants of this army, who sacrificed it all for the sake of what we experience today and what we seek to preserve, I'm honored to be able to welcome you here for your annual service, and I pray God's blessing upon you.
1799. On December 18th, a passenger jumped from a stagecoach and relayed the news to Congressman John Marshall. Visibly moved, Marshall reported to his congressional colleagues that this quote-unquote stressing intelligence is not certain. However, once the news was certain, Major General Henry Lee, Washington's military protege, and member of the House of Virginia of the 6th Congress, delivered a spirited oration to an audience of over 4,000 mourners, which included President John Adams and his wife Abigail. Where shall I begin in opening the review of character throughout its line? He said, shall I speak of his warlike achievements, all springing in obedience to his country's will, all directed to his country's good? He then traced Washington's military accomplishments depicted in the French-Indian War through the Revolutionary War and his service out of military uniform, culminating in his 8 years as the first vice president.
A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones and a time to gather them. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to search and a time to give up. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear and a time to leave. A time to be silent and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time to war and a time to peace.
Molly Sue Martin, Indiana, Jean Virginia Jones, Kansas, Joyce Phillips Esmond, from Michigan, Vernon Brian Anderson, from Mississippi, Gail R. Barton, from North Carolina, Annette Watson, from Ohio, Gail Crawford Smith, from Tennessee, James Layton Ferguson, from Texas, Jean Ann Davis White, Jeanette Porter, Ralph L. McDowell, from Virginia, Richard Roy Jarvis, from Washington, Beverly Jane Graham, from Mexico, Robert F. Burley. We mourn with all of those who are everyone in this world today, and we especially remember our Colorado Brady members as also the lost forever. Everyone must leave something behind when we die. Be a child or a book or painting our house or a garden wall built or even a shoes game. A garden plant. When people look at that tree or that flower you planted, you're there. And it doesn't matter what you do, as long as you change something with the way it was before you touched it to something that's like after you take your hands on it. Our departed members have served faithfully and all have left their own mark on our society. Thank you.
How did he live? Not what did he gain, but what did he give? These are the units that measure the worth of a man as a man, regardless of his birth. Nor what was his church, nor what was his creed, but had he befriended those really in need? Was he ever ready with words of good cheer to bring back a smile to banish a tear? Not what did the sketch in the newspapers say, but how many were sorry when he passed away?
Thank you. Margaret Lee's reading Remember Me also speaks to the lasting memories we create together. Father, O Lord in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. Membership 2024. And after we have spent several years apart, now we get back together again. I think each of us knows that we cannot take for granted that in-person celebrations that we have together and time we spend. I encourage each of you to take a moment today to celebrate with your fellow members, celebrate our shared history, celebrate with friends, and most of all, our time together. Usually with a Welsh blessing for our upcoming year, and its mercy, peace, and love for us always.
Welcome to come back in. There's a wedding today, so I do want to be mindful of that. They have a fabulous day for it, but we are a little not crunched on time, but.
If I get that
Jim, you on now?
I won't tell everybody to take a left. For everybody wanting to do the march out, we're going to start at Cannon Park. And to go to Cannon Park, we'll turn right out of the driveway, go down past Washington's headquarters, and when 23 goes to the right, take a left on Gulf Road, go across the hill. It's the second right. Don't turn right at the top of the hill. As you get near the bottom, it's East Interline Drive, I believe. But the second, it'll take you out to the parking area, and you can see the Cannon Park. For those that don't want to march, and just go down to the von Steuben or von Steuben statue just down here on the left. There's a parking area there, and we will be marching up to that area. And you can get photos and watch the color guard coming in there. Everybody cool? Is that clear as mud?
Yeah.
Can you do me a favor? Yes, ma'am. Pictures of my picture with my phone. I would do it. Oh, yeah, yeah.
We're staying at the hotel, so
Long story short, when we cleaned out my grandfather's house, we're getting.
I'm doing video. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, 3 cheers for the DVF color guard. Hip hip huzzah! Hip hip huzzah! Hip hip huzzah! Tent. This is the flag of Washington's lifeguard. And a few years ago, I stumbled upon the original. It's at the Washington Memorial, or Masonic Memorial in Alexandria, Virginia. I think it's on the 3rd floor, but it's framed and it's there. So this is what Washington's lifeguards carried.
This is the flag for Brandywine. My ancestor was at Brandywine.
This is the flag of the descendants of Valley Forge. Need I explain?
Woohoo! Doesn't say Texas on it.
And the Betsy Ross flag, of course, purported the first flag of the American colonies. Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, you know.
Good job, gentlemen. Thank you, Dave. Thank you. Big thanks to Dave Carr for bringing the flagpole.
Yes. Much later, I assume.
Yeah, I have poles. You got poles? Yeah. Good job, gentlemen. Thank you, Dave. Thank you. Big thanks to Dave Carr for bringing the flagpole.
Yes. Much later, I assume.
Yeah, I have poles. You got poles? Yeah.
I had my musket, so I couldn't shoot it down.
You missed it. Your good chance.
I know.
I'm glad you're here.
Hey, one more.
Build it.
The other way, George. The other way, George. I'll get it out eventually.
Yeah, I did.
Of course.
There you go.
You certainly can't ask people to remember what they ordered. Oh, the gentleman from Kentucky, he has one.
Y'all just keep doing what you're doing.
Okay.
You don't have to be still.
It's all right. We're conversing about lineage societies I don't belong to.
No, I've been to Kings Mountain. No, I've been to Kings Mountain, but I haven't been to Sycamore.
Like I told people, especially in Jersey, a lot of
Here you are, you beautiful silk.
And nobody knows about that area more than this man right here. That's a weekly news article. I worked on a article on Washington. It's you.
Here you are, making a movie again.
I'm being a nuisance.
With all the stars. I'm a has-been.
And you don't want to be like World Legend on that day.
It's a new season. She will eat dairy and eggs.
To me, I don't know the stories that tell.
I wanted to say thank you.
All right.
You don't have to be quiet in this.
You didn't get a dribbling down.
It's a long way.
Or me doing a spit take.
I coached my brother last year. I was
Fingers crossed because these are being printed up. And I was like, please be ready when you're finished. So thank you so much.
So after about
Yesterday, my granddaughter's
Oh yeah, you should show them that. I just looked at yeah, he's in. His brother, he has an older brother. My ancestors did very good. You know what?
Can you make it sound? I didn't have a bell to ring, so thank you. I welcome you tonight. Look marvelous. Who was the lady that used to say that? You look marvelous, darling. You all look marvelous.
Fernando Lamas.
Oh, all righty. So that's who it was. This gentleman knows a lot. But at any rate, I welcome you all to our gala dinner tonight. We're back together for the second year at Valley Forge, and I'm just so happy that we're able to gather together again this night for our gala dinner party. We have an excellent speaker. You will be meeting him shortly. But let's start the night off right. Will you please give us a toast, Mr. Inspector General?
Compatriots, please stand and join me in raising your champagne glass in a toast to our Commander-in-Chief for a successful encampment.
Thank you, sir.
Huzzah! Huzzah!
To our beloved DVF.
Huzzah!
To General George Washington and our heroic ancestors that makes this evening possible for us tonight.
Huzzah!
For liberty, freedom, God bless America.
Huzzah!
Thank you, sir. I will not donate it. We will have our salads and dinner served shortly. I'm going to ask you until then to feel free to socialize, learn to know your DVF ancestors and their patriots, enjoy each other, and then tonight we're just going to have a bang-up night, lots of fun here at Descendants of Washington's Army at Valley Forge.
And then I saw your name, and then I saw you.
Yes, it's for different. Yes.
Thank you. You'll see some old friends. Don said, I think it was
Stone and mold.
Yeah.
Some people say that.
These are the people that serve you, and you elected to serve you. And I'm so glad that you have been able to talk with them tonight, have some fun with them tonight, and before the night is over, if there is one person on the general staff that you have not spoken to, please make your way to them and take 5 minutes to say hello and introduce yourself. Thank you. Chaplain General, please do not sit down. The Chaplain General will give a prayer for the food that we have enjoyed and that we have eaten. Thank you.
So this evening, I ask you all to join me praying in your faith as I pray in mine. We give thanks for the blessings that we've partaken in this evening, both nourishment of body and soul, as we've enjoyed each other's company and dinner. May we use our time together now to foster our new and old friendships, enrich the society, and always pause to be grateful for the blessings and continuous care that you bestow upon us. Amen.
You know, I've heard the word a silver fox. What does that mean to you? A silver fox would be just a nice looking gentleman with gray hair. I've heard the word foxy lady, and again, a nice looking lady. I've heard wise as a fox, cunning as a fox. I've also heard of do not let the fox near the hen house. I've also heard of CNN and fox. Well, tonight, Bill Trotman is going to speak on a very different fox and a way of looking at things. Mr. Trotman, please.
Good evening.
Good evening.
It's a privilege to be with you. I think of my the 30 years or so that I was with the National Park Service. Most of that time was up at Valley Forge National Historical Park here. And that's where I started to meet members of descendants of Washington's Army at Valley Forge. I was disappointed because when doing family research, I was hoping to find that I would have a direct ancestry from someone at Valley Forge. I did not, although it was collateral. My great-great-grand 5 times. He was from Loudoun County, Virginia. Lied about his age, went in to the 1st Virginia Regiment when he was 16 years old. It was late in the war, 1780, and he said, well, I can get this bounty, I can get this extra land. It looks like the war is winding down. It's late 1780. He joined. John Starkey was his name. He thought that it was winding down. Anyway, he ends up, his brothers, 2 of his brothers were at Valley Forge, and they were older. But let me just mention a little more about my direct ancestor. He thought the war was winding down, and he ends up at the Battle of Guilford Courthouse, Greensboro. When finding in his pension records in the 1820s, because you had to show that you were destitute, doesn't necessarily mean destitute as we mean it today. But there were witnesses that says, yes, he was in Campbell's company of this, of the 1st Virginia Regiment, and they're writing down some details and all this. And he was at that battle, and he comments that in the 3rd line, of the heaviest fighting at Guilford Courthouse, and that was at bayonet point, when Cornwallis's men broke through there. And it was very rough. He looked up, and he says, there was a horse next to me, and a general officer. It was Nathaniel Greene. Right next to him. So I thought, that's cool. Then he's at Hobkirk's Hill, 2nd action down in South Carolina, where he's captured. I hadn't planned on giving this one. This is background, okay. He was captured, and then there's a little insert in there. I was rescued by Marion's boys. Francis Marion. And I'm reading this, I'm like, tell me more, what do you mean? You're Marion's boys rescued. I guess as POW from Hobkirk's Hill, he's heading down, I think, towards Charleston, and that's all he says. He didn't say whether he saw Francis Marion, but Marion's boys rescued me. He said, okay, that's enough fighting for now. Then Eutaw Springs, September, in the high hills of the Santee. Sanguinary. That was the highest casualty rates for both armies in one battle during the American Revolution. We don't hear as much about that battle because it was 1 month before the siege of Yorktown. But that's part of Greene's magnificent campaign 1780, 1781. But so I can't be a member of the Descendants of Washington's Army in Valley Forge. I kind of peek in, see what you have. I wanted to, some of this that I'm going to be sharing with you, I'm sure you know. But I needed a reminder. I'm thinking about the character of Washington. How human. If you have not yet read, I brought this. Now this single volume, Life of Washington by Ron Chernow. Most people remember Chernow because he wrote the Hamilton biography, which served as the basis for the Broadway play later and all, you know. We were commenting about this at the table. This was given to me years ago when it came out. And frankly, I was thinking, I don't need an extra book on Washington. I've got I have Douglas Southall Freeman's 7-volume diagram. I've got Flexner's 4-volume on, I've got all this Washington stuff. But I didn't want to hurt their feelings. And I'm serious when I say, there's that overused phrase, I couldn't put it down. Couldn't put it down. The intuitiveness, going directly from the papers, to show things about Washington's character that just aren't included very often. About how how volcanic or emotional he was. Case in point, and then we'll get right into this. In 1795, when Gilbert Stuart is fleeing creditors in Europe, Gilbert Stuart, who was considered the finest portrait artist American in the world at that time, was running away from creditors. It's just, he deserved it. He comes to the United States thinking, to get commissions, I can pay back some of these debts. If I can get someone to introduce me to then President Washington in his second term. This is 1795. And of course, Gilbert, the president, albeit reluctantly, he and Martha sit for him as they come up from Philadelphia into Germantown. For that, it's supposed to be the Washington portrait that we see on the $1 bill. When you see Martha, it's a dual portrait as they're facing each other, and it works very well. He never gave that to Washington or Martha. He never really finished it. He used that to make all that studio copy he used for all his copies, Gilbert Stuart, of Washington's head. But what I'm getting at is Gilbert Stuart commented when talking to Washington, he tried to joke around with Washington, trying to get it open up. No, Washington wouldn't give it. He says, well, you must forget right now that you're President Washington and just pretend that we're friends and open up. And Washington's response was something, he disabused him of that very quickly. He says, no, we're not going to pretend that I'm not Washington. But he says, this isn't an exact quote, but there's a fierceness in this man. If he was on the frontier, he would have been the toughest frontiersman. There's an energy, or even he's using this idea of very emotional, like an eruption. People didn't want to hear that kind of description of Washington. That was dismissed. He was a very emotional man. We think of Washington as what? The Marble Man, right? The Marble Man. That was also said of R.E. Lee, the Marble Man. But you find there are occasions here where Washington, I did a comparative paper on this a while ago, like Dwight Eisenhower, and there are a lot of similarities between Washington and Eisenhower. You think, that's weird, Ike and Washington, how would they have anything in common? They both had volcanic tempers. They both learned how to control it. They both wanted to be tactical commanders in the field, but they're forced. Washington was forced to be a political, right? Just like Eisenhower. George Marshall wouldn't allow, or Pershing wouldn't allow him to travel over to Europe for World War I. He had to stay stateside, and Eisenhower was really annoyed about that. But he got all this special kind of training, not just in logistical support, but all this, And Washington had his training in the Shenandoah Valley in his 20s, along with British units. You know this. Go like this. Please tell me you don't. And then you find that it's that Washington. This is still the introduction, by the way. It's that Washington, petulant, rude, arrogant. I mean, he knew he was smart, and he would use it over people. He could be double dealing. Washington at that age, in his early 20s, is not an attractive character. But he had some people, he had to learn lessons the hard way, but he was a quick learner with that. He was a quick learner. But he was forced to deal with supply matters. He was forced. Oh, they think they can be louder than me? No. I'll increase the volume. I've never been accused of being soft-spoken. Well, you're with the Park Service for 30 years. You learned, but anyway. Now, Washington wasn't. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't want to overplay that hand, but he could be duplicitous, and he just had a lot to learn. But even the British saw in Washington when he's 26 years old, 27 years old, on the John Forbes military expedition into the Ohio country. Washington is put in charge of a whole brigade. John Forbes, along with John Stanwix, Henry Bouquet, some of these names aren't as familiar, but Fort Bedford, Fort Ligonier, the fall of Fort Duquesne, Pittsburgh. Washington takes the front in that attack. And they saw this ability in Washington. But he grew. It helped too that he married the widow Custis. In those days, he married well, as they say. That's how now he already aspired. How he got that foothold while his friend William Fairfax, how George was introduced to that world of the Northern Neck Virginia aristocracy. You know that. But to cut the rough edges off of George, as how to handle himself. But what I'm saying about this is in his generalship, I'm going to say, thank you so much. I'm titling this Way of the Fox, not the Way of the Lion. Washington was very aggressive. He wanted to be on the offensive. And that's to a fault. And that's why he loses some of these, for a number of reasons, he loses a lot of these early battles during the Revolution because of his aggressive tendencies. But again, he was forced to play the way of the fox. Or the ancient Roman general, Fabian tactics, have you heard that term? Which is the indirect approach in having to fight that way. He was forced to do it. One of the finds, it's from 50 or 60 years ago at Valley Forge in the records that we have, fell out of this book some guy had from the 1790s. I'm not making this up. And it was a little letter, portion of a letter from Tench Tillman, the great Tillman family, probably Washington's most important military secretary, at least for the first 4 years of the war. And he writes a little note to Hamilton and John Lawrence saying, the chief is about to blow. Washington was about to explode is what he's saying. This was at Valley Forge. In other words, you better clear out. He's not in a good mood. Well, that's not nice saying that about Washington, but if anyone had a reason to lose it, often during the Revolution, and that's what I was getting when reviewing some of these letters, it was GW. He had to deal with a Congress, and I know you know, he had to deal with the Congress of the United States, and thank the Lord, he believed in civilian control over the military. We take this for granted, but Congress would make so many boneheaded moves. All the great minds for political science in the early United States during the war, they're not in the Congress. Some would come and go. The power is with the state governments. I mean, who is it that writes the state constitution for Massachusetts, which is still in force today since 1780? Who wrote it? State Constitution, Massachusetts, 1780, still in force, a good part of it. The Atlas of the American Revolution, John Adams. Because most of those great minds, Jefferson's much rather be in Richmond, you'd think, oh, he wants to be with the Continental Congress. No, he didn't. But there are times he would have, that's where the power was. And that's where the purse strings are. Under the Articles of Confederation, did Congress have any direct taxing authority? Oh, that's a rhetorical question, right? And so often Washington then is forced, or it's advantageous, that he would be writing to 3 or 4 governors in the area about supply, the quartermaster department, because they're dealing with state governments, and then that could open up corruption for those who were hired by the Congress. But that, the parts of that story, he has to deal with all these state governors who have their own interests, and he's got to be patient. Now, this, not denigrating or taking anything away from the French alliance, Washington also had to deal with the French. Many French officers, as you know, came over here even before the Treaty of Alliance. We call them foreign military advisors nowadays. That didn't start with Vietnam, folks. This goes way back. And in that first crop, or in the early crop, if that's the right word, coming over here were French combat engineers. The finest military, I know you'll want to know this, you'll lose sleep if I don't tell you this tonight. I'm being sarcastic. Is the finest military engineering school in the world at that time was Charleville-Mézières. It's in the Ardennes. Charleville, as you've heard of Charleville because of the shoulder weapons produced by them, Mézières. But it was understood that they were the finest combat engineers. Those guys were cooperative, and they weren't demanding high rank or pay in the Continental Army for the most part. And you've heard, receiving his command in September of 1777, the first commander-in-chief or leader of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Louis Lebec. And it looks like Duportail, doesn't it? Duportail, is that familiar? Yes, no, maybe? Duportail, head of the combat engineers. Washington understood the need, and the cartographers were under the engineer corps. Washington was all about maps. And Robert Erskine, he knew that maps were weapons, and it was really, really important to have, and that ties in with the engineers. But then all these other French officers are being sent over here. Young guys in their 20s, early 30s, usually the youngest sons in these aristocratic families who were spoiled brats, and their parents would send them over to help the Americans, and they could then serve as lieutenants and captains. And they come over and start bossing the Americans around like you don't know what you're doing. You see what I'm saying? There's some of that. And Washington's like really getting upset with some of these young officers. In fact, and I'll use the term, he wanted to drop kick about 2/3 of them back across the Atlantic. But he had to be so diplomatic and so careful. Well, another Eisenhower thing. Eisenhower had to deal with de Gaulle. That in its own right is volumes. North Africa and the invasion, and Eisenhower's like, about to go nuts. So it's another one of these similarity things. So you have those years of learning. Washington is a backbencher in the House of Burgesses, as you probably know. 1759, he's elected to the House of Burgesses, and as Jefferson was observing Washington, he says, Washington says very little, but the longer he preferred working in committee, but when, almost like the old E.F. Hutton commercial, but when Washington spoke during Burgesses, people listened. And he was listening and he was learning. And there's genuine humility that you see with him. And this is through struggles and things in his life that were building up. But he had those 5 years with the military. He now has to run a farm. He's a truly Renaissance guy, and that all this information that he was able to pick good leaders. Let me emphasize now, I just had some quotes here, otherwise just read about this, about his emotions. He was a man who was such a bundle of confidence and insecurity. He knew he was intelligent, and he quickly wanted to make things happen, but he had to learn many times the hard way. He was a bit too aggressive. Remember, Mr. Henry, this is Washington speaking to Patrick Henry at the Second Continental Congress when Washington is appointed to be the Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. This is June of 1775. Remember, Mr. Henry, what I tell you now. From the day I enter upon the command of this American Army, I date my fall and the ruin of my reputation by them giving me this. Patrick Henry responded that when he said that to him, that Washington's eyes were full of tears. One of many times when under stress, he betrayed his underlying emotions. Patrick Henry knew Washington, and he was there when Washington was genuine. He was in tears. He drew aside. We don't think of Washington being an emotional guy, do we? There are times he really was. He writes to Martha when he received that command, "It has been a kind of destiny that has thrown me upon this service." Later, as he says to John Adams, "I cannot explain," that's kind of the idea, "divine providence is guiding me and our decisions. I believe that the decisions that we make now will affect countless of millions yet unborn." Was that prescient or what? I can't explain it. Basically, the quote is, but I believe that providence is guiding me. Later in 1775, the blessings and protection of heaven are at times necessary, but especially in times of public distress and danger. Every officer and soldier will endeavor so to live and act, he wouldn't get away with this today, live and act as becomes a Christian soldier, defending the dearest rights and liberties of his country. Part of the humility came with Washington being a vestryman in the Anglican Church for 20 years, church warden for 4 years. How many of you know that at Valley Forge, Heinrich Muhlenberg, or as around here they say Muhlenberg. Heinrich Muhlenberg, the father of the Lutheran Church in North America. His son, Johann Peter Gabriel Muhlenberg, Lutheran chaplain. They called him the fighting parson. He had a Bible in one hand and a sword in the other. They don't do it that way now anymore. But Heinrich Muhlenberg, if you read his journals, which are in the Lutheran Library, Philadelphia, in the original German, where he said that when he first came to Valley Forge, Heinrich Muhlenberg visited Washington's tent, and they would just sit in the evening and talk about Scripture over and over again, about Scripture. And he would get the advice of Muhlenberg. How often do you hear about this sort of thing? That, as I said, that takes the edge off when it comes to things like Muhlenberg. Washington said 4 ways to win the American Revolution requires the patience of Job, the wisdom of Solomon, the courage of David, and the boldness of Daniel. I quote that to school students today. They have absolutely no idea what book I'm quoting. That frightens me. Now, so part of this tempering and some humility, and there were trials and testings in his life. Unquestionably, Washington believed that Providence watched out for the US of A and himself. He wrote his brother Samuel Washington that he had perfect reliance upon that Providence which heretofore has befriended and smiled upon me. Okay, that sounds nice. What was some of the reality of that? Marching into Valley Forge, he believes that divine providence is with us. Marching into Valley Forge, what were the last 2 meals they had from Gulf Mills before they marched into Valley Forge that snowy night of December 19th? The last 2 meals? Rice and vinegar. Not much of it. It's then the next day that Washington talks about 3,000 men were barefoot. That's not Disney and Hollywood history. That's true. And you could track the path of this army by the blood in the snow. The realities of that kind of suffering. Washington, almost in despair, he writes those famous words to Congress in January. He can't understand what's keeping the army there. You know the quote. Naked and starving as they are. We cannot enough admire the incomparable patience and fidelity of the soldier. What's keeping them there? Down to eating shoe leather and dog in February? As I say to the teenage boys that come, you think you're tough? And walking along, he was with Lafayette in February and saw 3 men on guard duty, and this was up by Muhlenberg's brigade, barefoot, but they're standing in their hats to try to keep it warm when they saluted as they went by. Dressed, also, 1/3 of the army that marched in was still in the summer wear. Just like the army today will have like a summer uniform, and they had a winter uniform. They were in linen and cotton. They're desperately layering with any civilian clothing, anything. No wonder they look at their uniforms are all different. They're wearing whatever they can get their hands on. That's one job you would not want in the Continental Army, was clothe your general. That and footwear, leather. They're all 8 years of the Revolution. Even when things are good, they're always short on leather. That's why when you're reenacting, if you want to be real accurate about Valley Forge, you can have your cartouche, as the French would say, your double flap leather cartridge box, double flap leather because you want to keep your powder what? Dry. Yeah, but they're not getting the leather. They have these tin things, little things to put them in there. They're not getting the proper leather. So they had canvas straps because you'll see us with leather strap. They don't have the leather. That's that problem with the shoe leather. Most of the tanneries were up in the Connecticut River Valley. And then when the shoes come in, they had 10,000 pair. Came in late January, early February. Oh, we can distribute these shoes, and these guys are. Did they have left and right feet? No. Do you know how the Army would break in? Well, you know, you're supposed to do it.
Got two of them on right now?
Yeah, do you really? Yeah. But to break them in, you've got to wear them maybe for an hour one day, you know, then you wear the shoes. Then you come back, you start to wear them in. And these guys have this callous feet. It took a long time just to be prepared for this. So it was pretty grim. And we know these shortages of Valley Forge and the whole story. The biggest surprise I would get through the years at Valley Forge saying, okay, this is winter number 3. Highest death total of the 8 winter encampments of the American Revolution. Did they know they had 5 more winters to go after this? No. One Connecticut sergeant wrote, "We are fighting in the defense of our injured country, and we are determined to persevere." And that sergeant went through all 8 winters. Twice he had been bayoneted. In fact, in New Jersey, one British bayonet went through the calf of his leg, went into a fence post, and he yanked it out and then just kept fighting. His name was Joseph Plum Martin. So, with these kind of shortages, and the suffering they're going through, Washington is pleading with these state governments to get the cottage industry. Without Connecticut, we lose the war. That's the cottage industry. But the problem is, the British Army is raiding the Long Island coast right along there so much, and they're burning all the warehouses. But they still were trying to, keep this up, especially for all those tanneries in the western Connecticut River Valley to get it down there. But it was so difficult just to keep up with that clothing issue. We got to move on from that. Oh, but when the visitors to Valley Forge said they got 5 more years after this, and we talk about the 3/4 mile long slit latrines. There's a pleasant topic. Actually, that drove vaults or sinks that are framed out. They understood the need to cover human waste with dirt, and that they had that figured out. The death total would go down, but because you have all this rain rather than snow and drying, and you know what happens, and it freezes, and then scabies and lice spread, and then the dysentery. But it's not just at Valley Forge. These shortages go on. Let me just give a few more quotes here. You get into 1779, 1780. Washington called Valley Forge the worst time of the war? No, you would think it would be Valley Forge. That's up there. It was the winter of 1780. That's the Black Year. The fall of Charleston, the surrender of 5,000 men. Benedict Arnold's treachery and the economy, the bottom drops out. All 3. He said that's when he was convinced it was going to be lost, right there in 1780. And he's pleading with governors to get cottage industry food, but the Royal Navy's blockading all our ports. Congress didn't have the money, the states didn't have the money. Who's the guy who used to fly kites in electrical stores? Without Franklin at Versailles, I mean, that's hard. I don't see how we would have made it. Or this emergency $10 million loan from the Dutch. That was huge. And what's forgotten also is the pay for Washington's army. 1.5 years of pay, back pay, with gold and silver, Spain. Not that they loved the American cause that much, or the French. But what's the old French saying? The enemy, how does that go? The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Yes. So what better way to tweak the British lion's tail is to aid these rebels here. And Franklin understood that. They have their reasons for what they're doing. But that was crucial. Valley Forge is a big turning point because they get word of the French alliance. It has that potential. And some of those great French officers that do come in. Mercurial temperament, he could be a pain, but he was a good combat officer. Capitaine Pierre Charles L'Enfant. What city does L'Enfant design 10 years later?
DC.
Washington, D.C. That's right. And Duponceau, just a number of them were very, very good. So the good news of Valley Forge, of course, is that the word of the French alliance, and also the arrival, and we always had fun. The kids always wanted to memorize the name Yves Gilbert Joseph Mortier, Paul-Yves Roche. Yves Gilbert Mortier, c'est Paul-Yves Roche, the Marquis General de Lafayette. Or as you say down south, Lafayette. Tim, that's right. And if you go to Lafayette's home in France, it's Lagrange, but in Georgia they say Lagrange. But
Yes, that's it. That's it.
That's right. No, but he was superb. Lafayette's, and I know I'm rambling here, but I'm trying to give certain background thing. Lafayette knew the king. He knew him well. And he knew the French finance minister, Turgot. And he travels back, people forget, he travels back to France twice to help loosen the purse strings of the French treasury. You know, Germain, the French war minister, says if you bankroll this American war effort, it could lead to real problems with the French economy. When's the storming of the Bastille? 1789? Even I could do that math, you can figure it out. But they did this. Lafayette was a great ambassador. And he knew, even though the king told him, now, you know, what they call Paul or Charles, do not travel to America yet. He says, we're not officially at war with Britain. The naval commander said, we're not ready yet. So Lafayette, don't go to America yet. What does he do? And the king knew him. If he puts his spies on him, he goes to Marseille, he buys his own frigate. He buys a warship. He crews it, and he brings all these other enthusiastic French guys, and they sail for America. And they said, the women of Paris went crazy. They said, here's a man who believes in liberty for our Americans, you know. And the king is steaming. But he would do these things, just keep the war effort going. And he really was the son that Washington never had. But these problems with shortages, here we go. Late December 1780, that was the dark years I was telling you. General Greene said that Washington was a state of, this is on January 2nd, 1780. General Washington is a state of distress, and he was blaming everybody, both innocent and guilty. And he lost it at times when he does this. As in previous winters, Washington was appalled by the lack of patriotism displayed by private citizens. He did not want to imitate British precedents and force nearby residents to house officers. You ever hear the Quartering Acts? So the reason it's mentioned 3 times in the Declaration of Independence is grievance, and it's why we have a Third Amendment to the Bill of Rights. Sounds strange today. That quartering issue. Voluntary offers were to no avail. Washington reprimanded men who plundered food or livestock from local farmers and warned his soldiers that a night scarcely passes without gangs of soldiers going out of camp and committing every species of robbery, depredation, and the grossest personal insults. This conduct is intolerable and a disgrace to the army, unquote. On the other hand, he privately confessed that he felt powerless to stop this marauding. When you haven't been paid for, back to this Spain story. Washington said this was providential. When they're crossing with General Rochambeau's march to get down to Yorktown before the British can reinforce them, they cross the Mason-Dixon line into Maryland. Anthony Wayne's troops in the Connecticut line won't move. They revolted. It's like a mutiny. They're marching, and they have to cover a lot of ground to get down there with our French allies. And they hadn't been paid for like 15, 16 months. I said, we've had it. But how often do you see that? And then miraculously, about the same time, this Spanish ship from the governor of Cuba, I forget his name, Rodriguez something, comes up and sails up the Delaware Bay, lands there, and in silver and some pure gold, gave them their pay for that year and a lot of back pay, hard coin. And paid the whole army. How often do you hear that? Oh, that stepped up their march. You see, but you don't hear about some of these things. In February, a British raiding party, again, this is that winter of 1780, 300 British dragoons rode up stealthily near Morristown, New Jersey, in an apparent plot to kidnap Washington. Did you know that there were 2 or 3 attempts to kidnap him?
Yep.
This one didn't work out well, Trumps, because of the deep snows. They turned back. There were a couple of, I was going through, there were mutinies of some of the other regiments that Washington had to put down later on, because this just went on and on and on. They just didn't have the supplies that they need. Again, I mentioned, let's go to this section. All right. All of that, let's go ahead. 8-year war, 8 winter encampments, the treachery of Arnold in 1780. The British really wanted Fortress West Point. That was a very near thing. Not only was Arnold a major general, Washington offered him command of half the army, what would be a wing command. But because of Arnold's wounding, twice when he was shot in the same leg, he refused amputation. In fact, he had 2 belted pistols with these surgeons. They were going to knock him out and cut his leg off. He said, the first one, if he does, I'll blow your head off. So that's why Arnold arrives in Valley Forge limping. You know, Washington, in a rare show of emotion, embraces him. And within 4 months, Arnold's in contact with British spy network. Like, we run into these revisionists who like to say Arnold should be given, we just don't understand him, you know, because his childhood or family. I love what Ben Franklin said about Arnold. When Ben Franklin in Paris heard of Arnold's treachery, he said, Judas Iscariot betrayed one man for 30 pieces of silver. This man, Arnold, has betrayed 3 million for only 20,000 pounds sterling. Miserable bargain. Miserable bargain. Here's the pecuniary. Okay. We got to get to the end of this. A, because I wouldn't want to listen to me this long, and you got to get to the better quotes here about Washington's greatness. It's the fact that he was just so patient. Henry Knox said Washington throughout the war never lost track. He wouldn't, as we would say, he lost track, pun intended. He would never deviate from the mission about independence, when he could easily have just freaked out. There were 4 or 5 times. One of the times Washington blew up, he said, I've had it. I'm going to leave right now. I'm just leaving. I'm going to take a corporal's guard with me, and I'm going to go in the mountains of Western Virginia and carry on the war out there. And he says, don't send me any mail. But that's how bad it got. But it's that incredible patience. There's the miracle of Yorktown. When I had to explain to kids when they asked the students would ask me, did they have cell phones back then? Yeah, right. And how long would it take for a ship? Let's say the packet ships for the mail, they call it the New York to Falmouth run. That's about 3,000 miles across the ocean. How long would it take the fastest ship, packet ship, to cross on the Falmouth run, taking advantage of the Gulf Stream? It's 21 days. That's the fastest. In wartime, you're only sailing as fast as your slowest ship when you're traveling under, what's the word I'm looking for? Convoy, right. And then on the way back, the fastest way was 5 weeks. Washington's trying to coordinate with a French fleet under de Grasse in the West Indies. Admiral Hood and the British Navy, why were they so interested? It turns into a naval war, and they're hammering each other all through the West Indies. Guess what bankrolled France and Britain's war effort? Sugar, molasses, rum. That's how they paid for it. So in fact, France valued Haiti, Martinique more than all of Canada. The British were about to give all of Canada back to the French. They wanted the sugar islands instead. Does that sound crazy? But that's what's going on. But he had to communicate with de Grasse. He had to communicate with another French admiral named Barras up in Rhode Island. That's where the French heavy artillery had to come down to Yorktown. And at the same time, sneak away from the British. He and Rochambeau steal this march and get all the way down to Yorktown before Cornwallis would escape. And it's another case Washington wrote to his brother later, whoever does not see the hand of divine providence, and this is blind, absolutely blind, where it was all coordinated, and it's just right at this moment. That was the surrender of 1/3 of British troop strength in North America. And you say, oh, Cornwallis surrenders only 1/3 of British troop strength? They were the best regiments. They were the best regiments. And there was a no confidence vote in the British Parliament, and Lord North's government fell. Lord Rockingham became Prime Minister. They didn't ask the King of England, they told him, you will begin peace negotiations with the rebels now in Paris because of what happened in Yorktown. Washington's farewell to the armies of the United States. This is wonderful. If you have a chance with your goof-off reading, read Washington's farewell message to the Army when he leaves the Army. That's at Rocky Hill. It's north of Princeton, New Jersey. I'm just giving you one of these few lines. It is my fondest wish that the same process that had welded men from Virginia and from various states and New Jersey and Delaware into the Continental Army would now form a model for the country. We have become a patriotic band of brothers. You think that started with the 101st Airborne Division called Band of Brothers? No, Band of Brothers. Washington uses this, which is from Shakespeare's play Henry V, right? After Agincourt. Yeah, after Agincourt. Washington reminisced about the high drama and dream-like events of the war, telling his men that what they had were experienced together was little short of a standing miracle. When the war ended, I think this is one of my favorite quotes from the Revolution, King George III visiting the Academy of Arts in London, is that what they called it? The director of the Art Institute there in London, and George III was quite an art critic and he loved painting, was an American who stayed, he was an American. He'd been in Britain for years as a court artist. And Charles Wilson Peale, Gilbert Stuart, John Trumbull, they all studied under this American in London before coming over here. Who am I referring to? He was born right over here off Goshen Road down in Newtown Square. Benjamin West. Benjamin West. He studied under Gainsborough and Joshua Reynolds. But King George III's in a bad mood at the end of the war. He's visiting the art set. He's talking. He says, well, Mr. West, what will your General Washington do now that the war is over? And there were witnesses to this. And it's surprising. He says, well, General, I know what, Your Majesty, I know Mr. Washington pretty well. He'll probably just go back to his farm. And the king said, if he does that, he'll be the greatest man in the world. Walking away. I've had a chance this week in a couple tours that I gave to people. I said, everything I'm rambling about, this monument or this and this, I said, go home, get on the internet. And I didn't say Wikipedia, but that could be, or that could work. And just type in Cincinnatus. Put in there Cincinnati. There's a city in Ohio named for George Washington, by the way, Cincinnati. Look up Gaius Quintus Cincinnatus of ancient Rome. And then had George Washington as the great Cincinnatus. Just as the Roman senator, Gaius Quintus Cincinnatus, hands all of his power back to the Roman Senate, and old Cincinnatus returns to his plow. Had you heard the story of Cincinnati? This was before there were Roman emperors. I know to do the story right would take 20 minutes, but I think I have like 5 to go here or something. Okay. Cincinnatus was retired as a Roman general over legions, and he had been a senator. And like all good Romans at that time, before you have emperors, you retire from the Roman Senate and you get away from the corruption of the cities and you go back to your villa, the Roman villa, where you work the soil. Sounds familiar. In a time of crisis, a runner was told to get Cincinnatus, go get him, because Rome was threatened by the enemy armies. I forget exactly, this was like 400 BC. Cincinnatus drops his plow, literally. He follows the runner. The Senate gives him the baton of their authority. It's a long, it's an axe head on it, and it's called the fasces. Our word fascist comes from that, but that's beside the point. But it representing all the power of the Senate, they give him the fasces, which means they're giving him the power of a dictator. That meant absolute temporary like we mean martial law. Temporarily, he's given all this power, which Congress ceded to Washington. Many times they gave him the power of a dictator, knowing he wouldn't abuse it. Cincinnatus raises the army, defeats the force threatening Rome, and this is the key. They knew their man. Cincinnatus comes back, formally hands that fasces back to the Roman Senate, and he returns to his what? His plow. The most famous French sculptor in the world at that time. Now, see, I'm having a senior moment. My Houdon, Jean-Jacques.
Don't do the English part.
Thank you. See, I say it's, he says it's all the time. I say it's information overload. Jean Houdon makes a trip over, and he does the life mask of Washington and so on, but he does the statue of Washington, takes all the measurements, and it's in marble. When's the last time you've been in the rotunda of the state capitol in Virginia, in Richmond? And there's a statue of Washington, right? Behind Washington. And there are like 20 or 25 bronze copies of this statue. We have one at Valley Forge. Behind Washington is a Roman plow. You see? And then there's the fasces. It's right, you can tell by the rods, but there are 13 with this fasces. You see? Washington has taken off his sword, representing his authority. He places that, he hands all that power back to the Congress of the United States. So you'll see that sword, and people go by this at Valley Forge all the time. They have no idea what they're looking at. The sword is on the fasces. And Washington's in his military uniform, but he's holding his civilian walking stick. That's the Cincinnatus statue of Washington. I had the privilege at the University of Pennsylvania to have a couple of profs. I mean, most of what I did was at Temple there, but who studied Washington very carefully, and they say, yeah, that's his greatest moment. When Washington, next time you're in the Rotunda of the United States and you see John Trumbull's, there's huge murals when you're in there, base of the Rotunda, it shows Saratoga and it shows the storming of Bunker Hill. And the one I would see this, it didn't make any sense to me. There's the largest image that John Trumbull did, those big paintings, and you see Washington just standing there with a piece of paper. And you see congressmen lined up in the balcony. It's just, I said, what's this? It's Washington at Annapolis, Maryland, on December 17th, 1783, where he says to Congress, meeting in Annapolis then, I am coming, now that the war's over, to present my commission. Washington's in New York. The British finally evacuate. He could get back home. On the way to Mount Vernon, Congress is meeting here in Annapolis. And that building, by the way, that's the only one of the 13 that's still in operation as the state capitol of Annapolis in that room. He says to them, I'm coming to present my commission. You see, as old Cincinnatus was given the fasces in the State House, Independence Hall, Washington was given a commission on vellum. You serve at our pleasure as Commander-in-Chief, 3-star General of the United States Army. You report to us at designated section. That's Washington's commission. He carried it with him, that authority. Rolled up. He says, I'm coming to present my commission. And he knew what he was doing. This is partly theater, but it was very calculated, but it's helpful. He could have mailed it back. It's on his way. He could have mailed it back. But I mean, you know the story. He rides into Annapolis. They knew this was an event. The congressmen were there. Their wives were allowed to come in and take the seats in the front. They're all the back. He comes in. And he has a short speech. Many consider it his greatest. And it was hard for him. He was visibly shaking, very emotional. And then after that speech, he takes his commission, and to the president of the Congress, Thomas Mifflin, he hands that commission. Says that all that power, that authority, back to Congress. And he goes back to his plow. He promised Martha he'd be home by Christmas Eve. He made it by 2 hours.
Oh, wow.
And Cincinnatus had gone home. That, Europe couldn't understand that. And we failed to realize that after the American Revolution, the British were absolutely convinced the colonies were always squabbling with each other before the Revolution. They couldn't even cooperate in any way, and they always had to play the role of an arbiter with these colonies. He said, they've won their independence, they're not going to be able to get along with each other. And under the Articles of Confederation, before writing the Constitution, there was a lot of bickering, wasn't there? A lot of bickering. They were convinced, George III was like, they'll call us back, they'll come crawling back. And they knew this. And so when they're writing the Constitution, they're saying, this has to work. This idea of self-government, power governed from the people, we forget how new that was. And they knew their man. They knew Washington wouldn't use that power. He's the great Cincinnati. Part of like what I said, he was, again, forced to do all these things where he would grow. He was forced to play the way of the fox. He's constantly having to retreat. He's constantly having to build an army in the face of an aggressive enemy, continuously doing this, and he did it brilliantly. Yeah, he was not a great tactician. He knew Nathaniel. Greene said, I'm a better general than Washington, but I should be serving under him. I'll always serve under Washington, because he has sound judgment. That's basically what Greene was saying. He knew. I went way too long. Thank you very much. I don't know if you have any questions or not on this dribble here, but nice to be with you.
One thing that always impressed me was Washington's equanimity, or apparent equanimity, when dealing with, for instance, all of these disloyalties and the Conway Cabal and Benjamin Rush and these people that were he thought were friends, and then they betrayed him. I don't know how I could have kept it together with that kind of betrayal. Do you any insight on that?
Yeah, I'm amazed by that too. Washington would take the high road. He really would, where I wouldn't have had that much patience. Yeah, someone like Benjamin Rush. Oh, did Joseph Reed, who had been trusted secretary, and then Washington read some letters from Reed where he was criticizing him so strongly. And I mean, Horatio Gates. Washington was just very, very patient with, I don't know how he did that. There were moments, he was tempted to tell him off or do something. But he was never mean-spirited. Also, General John Sullivan, who was a major general, not the best in the world, Congress was criticizing Washington. You can't put John Sullivan in charge of this expedition against the Iroquois, 1779, that punitive expedition. Look what he did at Brandywine. He's out there. Look what he did. In Washington, you could just see him in his office, like wearily. Congress is, you can't, Washington just one said, he goes, we must use the tools which we have. And that said so much about, and by the way, Sullivan did a superb job in that position, in that command. But it's Washington's patience and what he learned, not knowing. Again, he said this, people saw this as providential. Washington had to play this role of diplomacy all the time and when to hold back, when to be strong, testing his judgment. He didn't know that 8 year, that experience from when he's 43 to 51 is in preparation for another 8-year period from when he's 57 to 65, the 8 years of his presidency. Wow. Nothing surprised him then during the presidency. He knew what he was getting into. He wrote to Henry Knox on his way to New York for his inaugural. He says, I feel like a culprit on the way to his execution. He did. He said, I know this is not going to be, I believe that the nation is calling me. Anything else? Either I told you everything you want to know or I bored you to tears. It's one or the other. Thank you very much.
Well, don't sit down, please, sir. We want you to always feel close to the Valley Forge. And so we're going to give you harness for the Valley Forge teacher. And since you cannot be one of us, we would like for you to be our friend. And so here's a certificate for you to be a friend of DVF. Here's your certificate. To wear on your lapel.
I can wear that legally. I mean,
yes.
It's like, oh, that's wonderful.
So now you're one of us. Thank you so much. Madam Chaplain General, will you give us the benediction?
Certainly. All right, for one last
last time here at our 2023 encampment, I ask you all to pray in your faith as we close this evening. As we leave this place, we thank you for the privilege it has been to share time together, to connect with each other, to reflect over the past year and its accomplishments, as well as become excited for our society's future. Watch over us all as we finish our activities this evening and make our way back home tomorrow. Amen.
You did a great job.
Great job. Not at all, Todd. Thank you very much.
And so, up here between the flags, if you'd like to take any pictures tonight using your cell phones, or if Tim Massey would like to take some pictures, however you'd like to get together with our speaker, with each other, please feel free to stand up here with the flags and take a few pictures. And so I say, as probably you have heard before, happy trails to you until we see you again next year. Thank you.
You can all get up there.
Face of freedom stands tall and proud, furrows wrinkled on her perfect brow, footprints on the moon, a star-spangled sight, as the eagle soared into dawn's new light. Let every nation know, whether friend or foe, this eagle will soar forever and evermore. Let every nation long to see, on bended knee, with the dawn of victory, the dawn of liberty. In the beginning, the message was clear. Let every nation hear, the sound of freedom is near. Now we say goodbye to centuries of strife and brush away the tears from freedom's eyes. Let every nation know, whether friend or foe, this eagle will soar forever and evermore. Let every nation long to see, on bended knee, with the dawn of victory, the dawn of liberty. What will it be? The dawn of liberty? Will the torch burn free, or be a tear-stained memory? nation know, whether friend or foe, this eagle will soar forever and evermore. Let every nation long to see on bended knee with the dawn of victory, the dawn of liberty. The dawn of liberty. The dawn of liberty. Let freedom ring.